Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the very warm introduction. And so indeed, today we're going to be talking about narrative design, and more specifically, how we did it without the use of any words in Koira. So a little disclaimer, I'm going to be presenting really how we did the design specifically for the game of Koira, which is a puzzle adventure game. So this might not apply to all genre of games, but I hope that regardless of the game that you design, you might take some hot takes from it. So this is me. I'm the founder and creative director of Studio Tolima. It's a small studio based in Brussels, Belgium, and it was founded in 2022. And so we released last year, in April, our first commercial project, which is called Koira. And so, without further ado, here is a trailer of the game to show you a bit what it's about. So it's a top-down adventure game. You wake up in this snowy forest as this mysterious character. You don't know who you are. And you meet a little puppy in the forest who's in desperate need of help. So together, you become friends. You can play mini-games, build snowmen, watch the clouds, and you go towards a house in the distance. But along the way, there are some bad guys, there are some hunters that are trying to kidnap your dog. And so together, you will have to be able to overcome them to reach the end of your journey. The game was made with the support of the WAF, the Belgian tax shelter, and also Not as a publisher, and won multiple awards, including the best Belgian game of the years. And so what's really interesting for us is that it's a game without any text, any dialogue, and so the whole story and plot that we had to explain, we had to give it with the means of audiovisual, the emotion, the animation, the music, the sound effects, and of course, the interactivity. So directly, to explain a bit where came the vision of what we wanted to do with Koira, the goal was to make a game that's, like you can see here, there's kind of this graph showing very roughly a bunch of games. On one side, you have games that are more into kind of ludology and using a lot of systemic narrative, where you can project your interpretation in what is actually the plot of the game by using very vague settings and allowing the rules and the interactive themselves to actually dictate what you are doing and learning. And on the other side, you have more authored story, which are really using like cutscene, voices, dialogue, giving context to a lot of the objectives so that you know precisely what is the plot and what is happening. So with Koira, we wanted to be a bit between the two, to have the quality of a lot of these very emotional, mysterious, vague games where the player is really like putting a bit of themselves into the shoe of the character they are playing, but that at the same time, you wouldn't finish the game left thinking, what was this whole game about? That there was a clear plot, a clear narrative, character development, so that you really felt and lived that story from A to Z. So how did we approach it? So one of the first things that we noticed is that the structure of a story and a game are actually very similar. Both of them start with an initial situation. You have a character, a hero, and then you try to go towards an objective, and along the way there are some conflicts and resolution. And this is where the plot kind of evolves. And so for a story, you have this initial situation, the character wants to go somewhere, and along the way, there are some things in its way, and they kind of develop along the way. For a game, it's the same with the puzzle they might encounter, or the game loop and the challenge they might encounter. So this is going to be the kind of the layout of the presentation. So the initial situation. So you have this character, you are in the forest, and first we had these two tensions that we just saw, where we wanted to both have the kind of emergent narrative, where the player can really see the avatar as a puppet and use it to project their own kind of ways of building the game. So we wanted a lot of the moments of bounding between the two characters to feel very natural, so that, for example, playing with the dog, petting the dog would all be optional things that you would do by yourselves, and so naturally you would feel this more personal connection because you are literally building it. To enhance that, we didn't put a lot of text and dialogues, which would set kind of the meaning of what was happening between the characters. So they can talk together, but each of them is actually a different instrument. So the main character is a flute, the dog is an accordion. So a bit like in Peter and the Wolf, you can hear them talk to each other, but you can kind of think for yourself what is the dialogues that you are having with him. There's not a lot of backstory, actually none at all, which means that when you wake up, this avatar is literally you living the story. You are not role-playing the story of a character waking up in a forest. It's literally your story. You are the one waking up, and so there's no friction or introduction we have to do to make you merge with this character. But then we still want to guide the player emotionally, to have like this plot that we can tell and to make him feel certain key emotions. So how do we kind of mix this emergent narrative with this more scripted? Is that we used a lot of the animation, the music. So our characters are these kind of procedurally animated hand-drawn characters. They have different body parts. And you can see, for example, the head of the character can have a lot of different emotions. And so a bit like a big smiley that is very expressive. Through empathy, you're going to live and feel a lot of these emotions. So when you see a scene where the dog is really sad, your character is sad, naturally we're putting the player in the shoes of, okay, I should feel sad about this situation, or I should feel happy about another situation. And the second thing we do is we use, like we said, the voice and the vocal inclination. So we have a button dedicated to talking, and so you can literally talk to the dog and he can reply back. But because we use wind instruments, you can actually, just in the tonality of how the sound are made, have an inflection of, okay, it's like a sound of a sad accordion, of a happy accordion. And this already makes you feel kind of the emotions that the characters are having. Then we have this initial situation, and we want them to go towards the end goal. So in the goal of the game, you want to go to a distant house in the distance. So we took actually the formats of the stories very similar to a tale, and we did that to have the use of a lot of archetypal symbols. So symbols that are very universal, that everybody can kind of understand. And so, for example, a house is universally something that evokes a feeling of safety, a feeling of love, the same way that a dog is naturally in all culture one of the best friends of humanity. And you see that we had kind of this tension, that if we had gone too much towards the emergent narrative, so for example, you are going towards a mysterious triangle in the distance, then it would have allowed the player to project way more, but we would have lost some of the natural clarity of the subtext that we wanted to give to the story. And so this triangle could have represented many different things for many different culture and people. The same way that on the other side, if you had given too much context and said, okay, it's the house of the grandmother, you have to go there because she's waiting to make the soup or whatever, we are locking a lot of that context. And so the player cannot put a meaning into, okay, what does this house mean symbolically for me? So I can put, again, I can intertwine my own narrative into the scripted narrative of the game. So we did the same for a lot of the local objectives and local scenes in the game and try to be as intuitive and clear as possible. So for example, having animals in cages that you have to save. And for some of the objectives that were more tricky, again, we wanted to keep the immersion as much as possible, so to never give the feeling of the player of, okay, I'm playing a game or the controls are taking away from me. We tried to use more like this speech bubble, like you can see here, to evoke these more complex objectives. So for example, building a snowman or playing hide and seek with dog. So we have the initial situation, we have the objectives, and then there's really where the plot and the story happens. It's kind of all these conflicts that are happening between the two. So for Koira, we wanted to really have a feeling that you're having a whole journey, like you're going through a whole story. And so like in a good movie, we wanted to have very different atmosphere, very different moods, because like in a good movie, you will actually, in a relatively short amount of time for a movie, you will cry, you will laugh, you will hope, you will despair, and that's what makes it even stronger. Some games focus on like one emotion, one mood, and we wanted to have like very different ones. So you can see this is kind of the emotion loop of the whole game. Sorry, I'm going to be spoiling a bit of the game. So you meet this dog, you become very friend with him, you do these environmental puzzles, these mini games. Then the hunters are coming to chase you. So it's a very different mood. Suddenly it's more stealth, it's more dark. And so you find a power-up, suddenly you feel very powerful, and you can actually confront the hunters, and through this fighting sequence, you can actually beat them up. But afterwards, because you use this violence, your character is transformed, and the dog doesn't recognize you the same, and so he becomes slowly to become afraid of you. So there is this tension that you need to become stronger to protect the dog, but that as you do, he starts to go more away from you. And so this results in a feeling more of guilt and isolation. Now we had this kind of emotional loop that we knew would be the structure of the game and kind of repeating, and would have these different atmospheres and different core emotions that you would go through. But like in some games, you can have, like, for example, the level of lava, the level of ice, the level of the forest. Like these are very different moods, but they feel very disconnected. Like they don't really build a clear journey or a clear story. So for having that more linked to a narrative plot, we wanted to link all these mood and emotion to a clear red thread. And so linking it to the development of a relationship or a character development. Because this is what really a story is about, is when a character changes or something is changing along the way. And so for us, it was about the relationship with the dog. So you can see these are the 3 emotions in purple that are really the ones that are linking everything together, that you bond with the dog, you protect the dog, but then there is a consequence to it, so you have to reconnect with the dog. So there's many ways to view a story, and so this is, for example, a kind of graph that was made popular, so when we think about game narrative by that game company, who was showing how they mapped the emotional progression of the game journey to such a graph. And so what's interesting is that for a story like this, you can see that you have the highs and the lows, and these are creating moments of contrast, where suddenly we are switching from a high to a low and the opposite. And you can see that these are actually placed at the biggest emotional moment, the biggest narrative moments. And so it's something that we really paid a lot of attention to create this tension and release, to create contrast, to build on the emotion. So you've just seen before that we worked on the plot and the story to create like emotion as a succession of moods that were linked together by character development. The second thing is that we looked at emotion as really an experience of contrast, of moments where something is switching, something is changing. And so it's something that we know quite well, and especially from the audiovisual industry, there's a lot that we can take with movement of camera, movement of colors, you're changing the zooming, the slow motion, the color, the palette. These are all things that are going to provoke strong emotions. And in games, what we have on top is obviously to also create contrasts with the means of interactivity, to use the other non-playable characters, to use control, game mechanic rule, to create moments where something changes, something breaks, something is recontextualized, to create this moment of surprise and strong emotions. A good example, for example, is in the game Florence, which has this famous progression of the mechanic of the puzzle to evoke different emotion, so that you are literally playing these moments of narrative and feeling the contrasts between them. Something that we also notice that is quite interesting is that these moments of contrast, they create emotion, but they're always stronger if we link it, again, like we saw with the plot for the sequence of moods, to a human value, to a changed relationship. So for example, if you were in a family meeting to take a glass and throw it on the ground, it would create a strong emotion. Suddenly there's like a burst of sound, surprise, everybody's shocked. But if that glass was actually the favorite one of your mother, there's even more emotion linked to it, because suddenly it means something for the characters around. So we try to really time these moments of big narrative moments, of switch in the relationships between the characters with moments of big contrast. So this is a typical example of how we did so for Koira. And so this is one of the narrative beats that is more towards the end of the game. So like I said, there is this button that you can use to talk with the dog, and initially this is how you will actually tame the dog. So you will sing to him, he will sing back, and you will form a song together that will become kind of your leitmotif, or the song that's kind of defining your friendship. When you get the power to fight, actually instead of punching, it's actually through your voice that you fight. So it's changing your tone, and suddenly you will shout instead of sing. You will have this kind of red halo around your head, and so you can repel the hunters. But because your voice is now changed, when the dog is afraid of you, it doesn't really recognize your voice. So you have to actually do this mini game of reconciliation where you have to overcome your transformation to be able to sing that song again, so that the song can recognize you. Like we saw, like this loop kind of repeats. Each time you go a bit further into the violence, you have to become stronger and stronger, because each time the hunters are coming stronger and stronger. And so these puzzles of reconciliation are becoming more and more complex to evoke that feeling of the relationship between the two becoming more and more complex. Until the end, where you see the character transform fully and becomes like this big giant, and now your voice is actually completely different. It's a whole different instrument. And now the dog fully doesn't recognize you, and so there is this key narrative moment where it's impossible to reconcile with the dog, and the relationship kind of breaks at that moment. So this is to show you, so this moment, which is so in the second part of the game. So this is the end, for example, of the fighting sequence, and so the player emotionally at that moment feels very strong, feels like he was just like throwing lightning. And then you can see the hunters are on the ground, and for the first time you are really able to overpower them. So you can literally stomp on them to kill them, and these are kind of optional things that you can do. So if you want, you can kind of go overdrive and really like make the hunters disappear. And these attunements emotionally between the players and the avatar makes it that naturally we are making the player without scripting it, do some of the actions that are reinforcing what we want to show, which is here that you are going too far. The dog won't recognize you anymore. Then we take a lot of these mechanical elements, like we just saw, and we are recontextualizing them. So for example, the bench that you just saw, now when you sit on it, you're literally breaking it, while before it was a moment of bonding and friendship between the two. You have like these apples that you can feed to the dog that were also like a key moment that you were there to provide for him. Now you are stronger, so you can literally shake trees, but now the berries actually break into your hands. Obviously, there's so the reaction of the dog, and so how the characters around the environment are reacting, which is making it that now he's kind of fearful, he's kind of going around. Now you can see that there's kind of this mechanic where he's throwing you the keys, and you had to actually be able to rethink the key without breaking it, but here the player directly broke it. So on top of this contrast of mechanics, and you can see it's a lot of build-up of different moment of puzzles that are kind of shifting in context at that moment. We are using also the more classic, so audiovisual techniques of shifting the animation, the sound, the music. You can see here the world is kind of fully disappearing to evoke that feeling of sadness and loneliness. And finally, we are also recontextualizing some of the symbols. So for example, the house that they had just reached before, which was the happiest moment of their relationship, is now actually in fire. And so this creates also a tonal shift symbolically between what was happening. And with this, we already arrived to our conclusion. So we saw kind of like between the initial situation, the plot, and the ending, how we try to, as much as possible, have this balance between both guiding the player towards a clear script, a clear character progression, and have it that they are along the way as close as possible to the avatar, that they can also project their own story. They really feel like they are playing their own story through the game. So to do that, we try to have as much as possible of immersion and suspension of disbelief to make this world tactile, believable, that you are the one actually acting. So by, again, reducing a lot of the backstory, making it very minimalistic, removing a lot of things that would set too much the context, and still using animation and sound to guide the player in the right direction emotionally, so that they would be attuned to the moment and the story we wanted to tell. Then we used emotion both as moods, atmospheres, and create a journey by having like different sequence through them and linking them always to this character development, to what does it mean for the characters, how do they change, and so that the atmosphere would be linked, for example, to the emotion of the relationship with the dog. And then building these key narrative bits around contrast and having kind of tension where we are thinking backwards from this key moment and placing a lot of breadcrumbs, building up so that we can have this big emotional impact also mechanically at the moments that are important for the story. And finally, we use a lot of this symbolism to kind of have a tale that's very universal, that everybody understands intuitively what it means. It's not too abstract, but at the same time has the quality to be very universal. And I think with this, it's already the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Are there any questions over there?
Hi, thanks for the talk. I was wondering if you had any moments during development where you felt like this approach to storytelling was limiting you in any ways, where you felt like maybe players weren't getting it the way you had intended, or were you okay with letting it be open to interpretation?
Yeah, so I think it was one of the big challenges to find the right balance between the two. And we required actually a lot of iteration. And so initially we were, for example, a bit too cryptic. And so players didn't understand at all what was happening. They were like, okay, it's just very beautiful, but I'm very confused by what's happening. And then the more we were pushing it to have more author story and to really link it to key moment of story we wanted to have, the more we started to be binded to the story we wanted to tell, which meant that we had to adapt a lot of the moments of gameplay to the story, which also always makes it more complex, because in development of games, it's often better and recommended to start with the mechanics, with fun puzzles and gameplay, and then see what it means in terms of story. But so the moment we wanted to lock more and more the story, we had to kind of adapt. So there was this kind of going back and forth between being guided by the gameplay, guided by the emotion wanted to tell, and finding this balance between, okay, it's intuitive, it's clear in terms of gameplay, and we are able to convey clearly the story that we want to tell. So to be able to do that, we did a lot of iteration and a lot of playtests, and we really went quite in depth with the playtests, really recording the face of the player, trying to read emotionally, like, are they attuned with it, does it work? And really fine-tuning a lot. And we had the chance with our publisher Not to have like big round of playtests really regularly with a lot of people that are really into narrative design already. Because yeah, it's really small things, because like we said, it's very important that at any moment the player feels emotionally the story, and so the relationship the same way as the character. But the moment, for example, you introduce confusion in the game, like the magic stops appearing, because suddenly the player is like, okay, this is a game, this is frustrating, I don't know where to go, and then they start believing into the role-play fantasy that they are building. So we had to make sure it was very streamlined. The same way that we could have a puzzle where the dog was actually the blocking element, like you had to do something for the dog. But then if you don't succeed to do it, you're like, what is this stupid dog? Like he's the cause of me not progressing. And then again, you're completely in the wrong emotion. So we had to iterate a lot on these elements of interaction to make sure that the attunement between player and the avatar was as good as possible. So I think it's the key, yeah. Just play test and iterating a lot.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Oh wait, there's a microphone. Did you find that working with largely visual elements has made localization of the game easier or more difficult than working with language as a localization factor?
Yeah, so it's made it way easier because we have zero localization. So I think the only thing we have to localize are the credits, which makes it that the game has released, I don't know, in 30 languages. Like it was quite straightforward. And indeed, this was a choice from the start. We knew we were very small in indie, so this was a creative direction of saying, okay, like we know localization is going to be way easier, we won't have to worry about that. And then it's interesting creatively to try to solve the challenge in that way. And so this is where I was speaking about these archetypal symbols and things that are very universal, is to make sure that we could still have a very universal story that could be understood from people of all continents without needing too much explanation of symbols. And it's really stupid, but even when you think about symbols, for example, on top of doors, like it's very different in different countries. So we had to really find and iterate a lot on these simple things to make sure people understood it. So yeah, for localization, it was definitely easier, yeah.
Maybe one short. Okay, over there.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. My question is more about level design, about the emotions bit you wanted on your game. How did you intend to put them in which order? Did you already like knowing from the start of the game development to know the whole story, or you were like bringing, doing the emotional bit point by point when you were developing your game?
Yeah, so what really started the whole idea was this emotional loop that I showed with like kind of the 5 emotions. So to say, okay, we don't want to set the story too hard. And the story went through a lot of iteration. There were a lot of sub-storyline that changed up until late in development. But we had the core of, okay, these are the key emotions we want to touch on. We knew it was, okay, it was about friendship, it was about fear, it was about power and regret. And just having these 4 kind of pillars of emotion, like just with these 4, you kind of have the whole story of the game. It's kind of, I love this dog, I'm afraid, I need to find a solution, and then I regret using that solution. And then there's kind of this catch of there is no good solution. And so the whole story was able to be summarized very simply, and it still had its impact in terms of what was the depth of the moral choice in it, and what was the journey in terms of emotion. And so it allowed us to have a clear canvas that didn't move at all through the whole production, and to be very adaptable into how would we do things, in which order would a different storyline come. And so I think it was really important to have that, because if that part of the story could have changed too much, we might have lost some of the key elements of what made the soul of the game. Because, for example, this story progression and this kind of bittersweet impossibility of you want to protect the one you love, but by doing that, sometimes you can hurt the very relationship you wanted to protect, was really like kind of a sweet sadness that was really at the core of the game. And so it impacted the level design, the art, the music. And so that was a strong creative pillar that we really kept from start to finish, and that allowed us to iterate on the story without changing the core proposition of what made it interesting in the first place.